Welcome to Tech Driven Business brought to you by Innovative Solution Partners. Lisa G. Smith, a trusted global procurement leader and SAP executive advisor, joins me to share how enterprises can leverage SAP to revolutionize their supply chains. It's about optimizing business operations, change management, and so much more. Listen in for what it takes to be successful. Welcome to Tech Driven Business, Lisa. How are you?
Doing great, Mustansir. How are you?
Doing wonderful. Thank you. I'm so excited to have you on our show. And today we would like to talk about SAP transformation and process improvement and what other person can talk about that, especially in the context of supply chain processes. So I really look forward to this session with you.
Well, I certainly appreciate the invitation to do it, and I'm excited to be here. And thanks for the opportunity. I enjoy being able to share some of those learnings and have these fun discussions. So,
Absolutely. So let's get into it. We talk about companies leveraging SAP. When you talk about leveraging SAP to identify and eliminate, basically the idea is inefficiencies in the supply chain
right.
processes. Uh,
Mhm.
how can they do that? What's your take on this?
Well, I think, first of all, great technology can be used to really drive change around how business gets done. So, defining what's important for the business to have going forward, defining what is important and what they need, then allows for SAP's technology to drive how that gets done. But with that, there's a lot of change to those processes, or if you really want to transform the business, there should be. But with that, you need to be mindful of the change impact that comes along with that. The change that impacts the people, be it internal employees, be it external with suppliers, for example. And you want to bring those folks along on that journey and get them excited about the change, right? One of the things that I find is tremendous is being able to leverage SAP's technology to streamline, commonize, and simplify processes across the enterprise. And it has the great breadth and depth in order to do that. And that process capability depth and breadth allows for that to happen. And so it allows you to then ask yourself as an organization, why can't we do business, for example, the same way everywhere? Unless there's a legal or regulatory or tax reason, why do we have to be different? How can we simplify this? How can we take some of that inefficiency out of the process? And the software can really help drive that.
That's an excellent point. I think what I'm hearing from you is as much as you can commonize your processes and be
Mhm.
able to keep the system as simple as possible allows you to leverage the capabilities a lot more
Yeah,
than you
especially
do
with
here.
cloud technology to get the
Yeah,
the uplifts and the upgrades and take advantage of those. Definitely.
absolutely. That kind of leads me into this discussion about, everybody talks about metrics. When we talk about SAP driven process improvements, especially, what are some of the key metrics to measure your success in those scenarios?
Well, I think regardless of what functional area that you're looking to improve, be it in finance or procurement or supply chain, manufacturing, inventory, wherever, I think it's important to start with what are the objectives for the business? What is it that you're wanting to achieve and accomplish? Whether it is additional incremental cost savings, whether it is operational efficiency improvement, whether it's better compliance and controls, or faster days to close, or better forecasting, lower inventory levels, whatever those metrics are, I think it's important to use the business objectives to drive that and then determine what success looks like. What are those objectives? How are we going to measure those and determine those up front in your process, in your future state design? If I want to improve on-time sourcing by 25%, like let's say, or lower raw materials inventory by 10%, that's a clear objective. Now, how am I going to measure that? What's my format or the actual calculation tactically to measure that? And then you can understand those. And the reason it's important to understand those up front in the process is because that helps ensure as you're designing your future state business process in the software and the software starts to be configured, that you drive those outcomes based on those metrics. So, what are those metrics that are important to your business to achieve success, and implement those very clearly with a way to measure, and then use those to guide the future state process design.
Interesting. So it seems like you're using your business KPIs and kind of molding it into what SAP can do for you in those key metrics.
Right. And there's a lot of embedded kind of inherent KPIs that are part of that process. And then, of course, with the incremental AI capabilities and the analytics capabilities and so forth, you start to bring those metrics to light much more quickly than perhaps in a previous state, especially if that previous state was manual or very heavily reliant on Excel and things of that nature, which I'm sure there's a lot of
Absolutely.
companies that experience that.
No, absolutely. I think you hit up on a very good point over here. I mean, analytics is one of my areas, and I know that it is so important in these SAP implementations that you have a very, I mean, there's a robust set of analytics that comes to the system, but based on your business requirements and your measurement or the KPIs that you're looking at, it can play a huge role in your success.
Yes, absolutely. It can jumpstart or serve as a catalyst for those metrics. Many of those metrics are already, from a common sense point of view, there may be incremental ones that you want, and the data exists to allow for those to be created. And so there's a lot of flexibility in that space. The quality of built in compliance exists because it is moving processes from one step to the next, and doing so with quality and embedded foolproofing mechanisms, similar to an assembly line, for example, when you're doing quality checks as you're assembling parts on a product, for example. You have the ability to understand the outcome. The embedded process capability that exists has a built in quality, and with that, the analytics that come along with it. So those analytics are being driven by quality information and quality and disciplined processes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I like the comparison you gave with the assembly line. It's so true. It's everything. It flows in a very seamless manner. So it's like you don't even notice how this next process is going to take over. It's just from a business standpoint, it makes it so much
Mhm.
easier
Right.
for folks who are dealing with it day in, day out, that not only the analytics part, but the different functions being able to communicate freely with each other.
Exactly. Yeah. And share the actual data, share the real time data, allow the source data to drive analytics, but it's a consistent set of source data that is across the functional areas, although their metrics might be different and what they derive from that data may be different. It's based on that same quality of source information. And I think that's a really impressive capability to be able to bring to the analytics table, and bring that discipline to the analytics.
Absolutely. Kind of leads me into this next discussion. Everything needs change management. Change management is one of the big topics, right? Uh, when you are doing an SAP transformation, especially in a global organization where you have to deal with cultures, where you have to deal with languages, different way of doing things, how do you go about doing it?
Well, my first two words are very carefully.
Got
The
that.
change management aspect of any, implementation like this, or call it transformation, the change management is as critical as the business process, as the software, those other elements. It is key to a successful adoption and a successful outcome. But it starts with having the case for change, because what you're doing is formulating a vision for folks to help them understand this is where we want to go. This is where we want to be, you know, in the future, so many years from now, and so forth. So, what is that case for change? What's driving us to need to move to this next level? And if people understand the why, okay, that case for change, they're going to be far more open to considering and actually start to get excited about it. And I think that is also very important, to have that message and that case for change articulated by the senior leadership from what I call a top down perspective and a top down advocacy, because that message sets a tone for the organization. And it filters through the organization, and it's a very important part. I had a very strong set of C-suite leaders that were very much advocating for this. And so they were able to articulate that message. And then we could take that and embrace it with what I'll call a bottom up approach with the affected stakeholders. So, who are those stakeholders? Understand the different, what I call personas. Are we talking about requisitioners or buyers or manufacturing operation people or finance analysts? Who are the stakeholders that are going to be affected or impacted by this? And understand their cultural differences. From a culture standpoint, whether it's across regions or countries, whether it's across functional areas, how messaging and how that change is impacting someone in Europe versus Asia Pacific, very different. And so, how you package the information and package the communications is important as well, and to nuance or tailor that accordingly. Nuancing and tailoring also for the functions. What maybe how manufacturing perceives it may be very different than how marketing would perceive it or IT would perceive. And so, how do you tailor again to the nuances of a particular functional area as well? If you can understand that impact and what the technology is going to do to their respective business processes, then you can say, well, what input do I need from them to ensure I take into consideration what's necessary? Now, how we do it may look different, and we'll assess that impact and create a strategy around that. But I need to make sure I consider what is needed for for them to do their job successfully. And so when that's understood, then you can help them understand the change, keep them tied into what's happening, keep the communication flowing, and it gets them excited about a new way of doing business. And you can start to get creative about the way things are communicated using, animated personas to help illustrate the from and to condition or communication broadcast. Various things can be implemented and deployed. To give one example, when we had a very wide span of particular personas, in this case requisitioners, that had to be communicated to, and they were very different because every function in the company requisitions. We held virtual office hours and we held them in local languages. We had the training materials in the local language because somebody on the manufacturing floor may not be proficient in one language, let's say English. So we had the materials in local language and so forth, depending upon the personas. So those are the things that need to be considered to help respect that input from the folks who are impacted, and then be able to communicate it in a very clear way that resonates for them.
No, I think that's a great advice and a great takeaway, especially when you're dealing with the folks on ground. You want to make sure that you're able to reach to them the way they can consume the information and be
Exactly.
able to train accordingly. So now
Absolutely.
that's very helpful. On a personal note, how are you staying on top of changes? Now we are talking in the AI age. Both business and technology are rapidly changing. So how do you keep up with these kind of uh, change?
Well, my youngest son would tell me I don't, but in reality, what's important to me is understanding the continual evolution and innovations that are happening inside of SAP's technology, for example, and cloud technology in general. And I think there's so much out there. Yeah, SAP has tremendous webinars, insights, podcasts, things of that nature that can be very illustrative of what's going on. There's a lot of information in various media forms that I use, but they're webinars, and also I do a bit of Googling and, YouTube demo watching and those kind of things. Also, I think their solution integration partners, their solution integrators also bring a lot of insights around what's happening, what are the trends in the business, what's happening in this industry, what does that mean in terms of leveraging the technology. So it kind of brings the technology and the business together to understand where things are headed, be it what are some of the new challenges of chief procurement officers, for example, in a post-COVID society, very different than a pre-COVID condition, perhaps. And so those kind of strategic understanding, as well as what is the technology doing to support that understanding, is largely available. So I do a lot
No.
of that just out of interest.
Yeah, no, that's the only way right now to keep up is just be aware of what are the mediums available to you and have that tenacity to go and get that information from wherever you can get and keep up with the changes in technology. S4HANA is top of the mind. A lot of companies these days. Um, how can companies ensure a smooth transition to S/4HANA? And especially when you talk about S/4HANA, it's a big undertaking. How can you minimize disruptions to your operations? Can you elaborate on that?
Again, I'll use that very carefully answer. But I think the first thing is it's important to prioritize risk mitigation first and foremost. You never want to jeopardize the business or disrupt the ability to provide the goods or services that the company is charged with providing. And you can't take it all at once either. How can I sequence this? If I establish a longer term vision or a view or a roadmap, okay, of where I want to be, I have to take it in a series of steps. And perhaps some of those steps can happen in parallel. Some need to happen in a particular sequence because of interdependencies. Some may be able to, as you learn, you might say, gosh, I should do this instead first and then followed by X. I learned a lot of those things as we went through deployment, and the ability to kind of flex and be a bit more agile, I think, is important. But
Yes.
sequencing things in order to try and gain the optimal value as quickly as possible while you mitigate the risk. It's a delicate balance, but that's probably one of the more important principles, if you will, to have top of mind in terms of how can I glean the value quickly while I de-risk the business.
Mhm.
And in order to do that, I think you need to have very clear timing
Mhm.
milestones and deliverable milestones. And there needs to be a very good, disciplined program or project management process
Mhm.
that is enabling that to take place. And you need to do that in order to ensure that the timing is kept and also to contain the cost. Otherwise, you can start diverting off on different paths and the scope starts to creep and the money starts to keep moving up, on the scale, and the timing continues to shift out. So it's really important to keep the clear timing with the deliverables and have a governance of project management to control that very, very tightly. And then the other one I mentioned is governance. That is critical as you're changing these processes and you're perhaps completely eliminating a policy or preparing a new policy in order to do business a different way. Then what governance do I need to have in place so that I escalate those decisions quickly, so that I'm not being bound by or delayed by lack of policy decision making, lack of policy change approval, for
Mhm.
example, on the program. If I know I need that policy changed in order to configure it this way, I better start having the governance, or I better have the governance in place to be able to escalate that quickly if it requires certain levels of approval within the organization. And then readying the organization for change. That's one of the key attributes to ensuring a smooth transition. Having a robust cadence of communication, a repeated cadence so that people know what to expect. It can be at a relatively high level, and as they get close to their respective deployments, it becomes more granular. The
Mhm.
communications, the training materials, the virtual hours, things of that nature become more granular as they get closer to
Mhm.
their respective deployments. And then I employed something that Toyota taught me. They referred to it as PDCA, and Plan, Do, Check, Act. And so I have a detailed plan, not just about the program milestones and deliverables, but everyone's role and responsibility and all of the things associated with making that implementation happen or get to that achieved outcome, and execute to that plan. Have the controls on the status through the project management or program management and the governance that I mentioned.
Mhm.
Then act and adjust accordingly if and when needed, which inevitably it will be needed. You have to adjust
Absolutely.
course. But it's really a PDCA continual loop of plan, do, check, act as you move through the life cycle of a program.
I like it. And it's very useful, especially when you are in this cycle. You want to make sure that every small piece is covered. And the only way you can do it is having the right governance, having the right plan in place, and then, of course, the checks and balances at each and every milestone. Uh, so we talked about a lot of different things. I would like to leave the session with what is the one key takeaway you would want to leave with our listeners today? Can you share that?
Yes, I would. It's going to be two. One is embrace the technology to allow it to propel your business forward for a long-term sustainable outcome. And do that with an open mind to changing process and leverage that technology to drive that simplified process and understand the impact from a change perspective that comes with it and manage that in concert. Because when you do, the success can be absolutely tremendous. It can be transformational, but the two go together.
Absolutely. Great advice. Thank you for coming on our show. It was a real pleasure to have you join us today.
Well, likewise, I really enjoy the conversation, and certainly it's an exciting space. There's tremendous opportunity for companies, that are looking to find whatever those objectives are: improved efficiency, cost reduction, all the different things, the disciplines that can really level an organization up to the next stage and the next level in a long-term way. So it's great fun, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to have the conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for listening to Tech Driven Business brought to you by Innovative Solution Partners. Lisa shared valuable insights that apply to all areas of an enterprise. Her key takeaway: embrace technology to allow it to propel your business forward, while effectively managing the change impact to ensure a smooth and successful transition. We would love to hear from you. Continue the conversation by connecting with me on LinkedIn or X. Learn more about Innovative Solution Partners and schedule a free consultation by visiting isolutionpartners.com. Never miss a podcast by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Information is in the show notes.